would save us from going down. Well, at any rate, there were a lot of obstacles in the way of me realizing my dream of becoming a physician, not the least of which was the fact that my parents got divorced early on. And that was devastating. My mother was one of 24 children, and she got married at age 13. And, trying to escape the horrible poverty of rural Tennessee. And she was bounced from one home to another, and this was her chance to get out. And they moved to Detroit. And he was a factory worker. Some years later, she discovered that he was a bigamist, had another family. And that, of course, resulted in a divorce. And she only had a third grade education, and there she had the responsibility of trying to raise me and my brother. And we ended up moving to Boston to live with her older sister and brother-in-law. Typical tenement, large multi-family dwelling, boarded up windows and doors, sirens and gangs. The roaches were very impressive. In the more upscale areas, they call them water bugs, but we knew what they were. And not only would they crawl on your table, they would crawl in your cereal box. So if you were eating Raisin Bran, you had to know what those brown things were. I probably shouldn't talk about that now that I'm on the Kellogg board, but the rats, the water rats, the first time I saw one, I thought it was a dog. These things were so big. And while we were there enjoying that environment, my mother was out working extremely hard. 2 and 3 jobs at a time, leaving at 5 in the morning and not getting home until after midnight, day after day after day. And why did she work so hard? She only had a third grade education, but she was very observant. And she noticed that no one she ever saw go on welfare came off of it. So she didn't want to go on it in the first place. And she worked very hard to stay off of public assistance. She occasionally accepted some, but for the most part was very successful in staying off of it. And the thing that was interesting about her is that she never made excuses. She never felt sorry for herself. And I think that was a good thing. The problem was she never felt sorry for us either. So, there was never any excuse that we could give that was good enough. She would always say, "Do you have a brain?" If the answer was yes, then you could have thought your way out of it. It really doesn't matter what John or Mary or Susan or Philip or anybody else said or did. And in retrospect, I think that was perhaps the best thing she did for me and for my brother, not to accept excuses. Because if you can find an excuse to wallow in, you don't have to do anything. You can just sit there and blame somebody else. And that is a formula for failure. No matter what the job is, that will lead to failure. Well, one thing that I should mention before I go on, a disclaimer. We all make disclaimers these days. They say, I'm sitting on this board, or I'm associated with this group, and therefore you have to take everything with a grain of salt. Well, here's my disclaimer. I'm not politically correct. Don't be surprised if I say something that offends somebody. It won't be on purpose, but I just don't believe that it's the American way to go around straining every word that you make to make sure that you don't offend someone. Wouldn't it be better if we taught people not to be offended so easily? I think that would make a lot more sense. But, the PC police have gotten people so frightened. Some of you probably saw the little argument I had with Wolf Blitzer on CNN this afternoon about that, because he's trying to be PC, and I say, see, you're demonstrating exactly what I'm talking about. And, intimidated. And they're afraid that somebody's going to call them a name. I mean, if you're pro-life, they'll say that you're anti-woman. Now, how ridiculous is that? To pit a fetus against the mother, the most tight bond that there is. But that's how silly we've become. We've allowed people to intimidate us by calling us those names. If you're pro-traditional family, then they say you're a homophobe. If you're white and you disagree with a progressive black person, you're a racist. If you're black and you disagree with the progressive agenda, you're crazy. And if you're black and you disagree with the progressive agenda, and you're pro-life, and you're pro-family, they have no idea what to call you.
Yeah, why didn't they say that?
You know? And it really is all about intimidation. It can make people afraid. I remember learning about intimidation as a young child. I was definitely afraid of dogs. And, I would be late to school because of dogs. I'd be going to school, I'd be almost there, and there was a dog. And I'd have to go all the way around the block, get there again, and there was another dog. And I have to keep going. And it was so disgusting. And finally, a man told me, he said, dogs will not bother you if you're not afraid of them. Just ignore the dog, and they will absolutely leave you alone. I said, are you sure about this? Well, there was a dog on our street named Rusty. Nobody liked to go down near where Rusty was because he was a vicious dog. I said, I'm going to test this out on Rusty. So I go walking down there, and Rusty couldn't believe his eyes. He came charging out there, snarling and barking, and I said this was a mistake. And he ran right up to my leg, sniffed it, turned around and went back. The next time, he just barked from the porch. The next time, he just looked at me. The next time, he didn't even look at me. It wasn't worth his while. If I wasn't going to be afraid and I wasn't going to react, why bother? You know what? That's what the PC police are like. And all we have to do is learn to ignore them. They have no teeth. Forget about it. And I think it will make a huge difference in America because, first of all, we the people are not each other's enemies. The enemies are those people who try to divide us up on every basis, everything that they can. Divide and conquer. And you know what Jesus said? He said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. So if they can't bring us down any other way, they make us bring ourselves down. The only problem for them is this. They think we're stupid. They think we can't figure this out. But guess what? We can figure it out. And we can understand that our strength in America lies in our unity. And we cannot allow them to pull us apart and make us into enemies. We need to recognize who the true enemies are. They're the ones that we need to get rid of. That's what we can do. Well, interestingly enough, there we were in Boston, just having a horrible time. My mother's dream was for us to get back to Detroit. And after a couple of years, we were able to get back there, still in a dilapidated multifamily dwelling in a horrible part of the city with significant wildlife. But nevertheless, she was independent, and I was a 5th grade student. I was a terrible student, probably the worst student you've ever seen. I thought I was stupid. Well, let me tell you something. It is a terrible feeling when you think you're stupid. And you do all kinds of things to try to hide it. act like you really don't care. But I did care. I remember we were having an argument in the school playground about who was the dumbest kid in the school. It wasn't a big argument because they all agreed it was me. But then somebody tried to extend the argument to who was the dumbest person in the world. I said, wait a minute. I said, there are billions of people in the world. And they said, yep, and you're the dumbest one. So, well, unfortunately, that day we had a math quiz, and you had to pass your paper to the person behind you. They would correct and give it back to you. Teacher would call your name out loud. You had to report your score out loud. Great if you got 100 or a 95. Not so great if, like me, you got a 0 and just had an argument about who was the dumbest person in the world. And I knew when I said 0, they were going to just laugh hysterically and say, we told you. So I started scheming. I said, I know what I'll do. When the teacher calls my name, I'll mumble. And the teacher will think I said one thing, and the girl behind me who corrected my paper will think something else. So when she called my name, I said, 9. And she said, 9? Benjamin, you got 9 right. Oh, this is wonderful. I knew you could do it if you just applied yourself. Class, this is a banner day. Benjamin has got 9 right. It had 30 questions. She just kept going and going and going. And finally, the girl behind me couldn't take it any longer, and she stood up and said, he said none. The kids were rolling in the aisles. They were beside themselves. And if I could have disappeared into thin air, never to be heard from again in the history of the world, I would gladly have done so. But I couldn't. So I had to sit there and act like it didn't bother me. But it did. It bothered me a lot. Not enough to make me study, but it bothered me a lot. And, I was just glad to get out of school. But, I'm reminded of many of the students that I encountered today. And even more sadly,